Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, The Benefits of Moving to ATM as a Service and Seacoast Bank's Recipe for Growth and Transformation. I'm Craig Driver, ABA Vice President, Partner Network Account Management. And with us today, we have Shpen Ibrahimi, Executive Director for ATM as a Service for North America in the banking division of NCR Atleos. Shpen leads the design, delivery, and enhancement of the ATM as a Service solution for the North America market. And we have Julie Kleffel, EVP Chief Operating Officer for Seacoast Bank. Julie leads the retail banking, global banking, loan and deposit operations, technology and data management, residential lending, specialty finance, and call center operations. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Shpen to launch the conversation with Julie. Shpen?
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate the warm introductions. Thank you so much for doing that. Also, before we get going here, I also want to start out by saying thank you to the ABA and all the banks who have joined us here today. We realize that you're all very busy, so we certainly appreciate you being here with us today and separating some time. Now, before we get going, I also want to start out by saying thank you to Julie and Seacoast Bank for being here with us today. And we appreciate you, Julie, and your partnership. Just based on your introduction, I realize you're a very busy lady, and so I understand that and appreciate you separating an hour out of your day to be here with us as we have this very important conversation. Now, before we get going here and have a discussion with Julie, what I wanted to do is provide at least a preview of how our session today together is going to go, so you all are aware of sort of what the intent is. So from our perspective, what we're going to do first is introduce NCR as an organization so everybody's aware of who I represent, and then talk about as a service to a high-level degree, just to define what as a service is so we can baseline the conversation today. At that point, I'll turn it over to Julie for her to introduce herself and then, of course, her organization that she represents. And at that point, we'll turn it over and we'll have a discussion between Julie and I. So that's the intent for the session today. So with that, I'm going to go to my next slide and just start talking about NCR. As I said, I represent NCR Atleos. And so you all know NCR Atleos from various engagements you have had before. But at a high level, NCR is the world's largest leading manufacturer of ATMs and the software that we develop for those ATMs and the applications that we use to run those ATMs. Now you can see the various figures here. I won't read those through those for you. But at a high level, what I would say is that in addition to us manufacturing ATMs and developing the software for those ATMs, we also operate those ATMs on our behalf. We're the world's largest independent ATM deployer, and we own and operate more than 80,000 of our own ATMs here in the U.S. and globally as well. In addition to that, we have the largest surcharge-free network. I'm sure many of you have heard of Allpoint. I'm sure some of you belong to the Allpoint network, and that has access, it provides access to more than 60 million cardholders in the U.S. and globally as well. Now, in addition to that, as part of our NCR Atleos evolution as an organization, we're also helping financial institutions in the industry from an as-a-service perspective, based on the challenges that we're seeing, not just from one bank to another, but really from an industry-wide perspective, based on conversations we have with our partners, with our customers, and various banks and other participants in the industry. And so that's the intent and as far as what we're trying to accomplish here today. Now, with that said, most of you know that the vast majority of the banks and credit unions in the U.S., close to 10,000 of them in total, operate under the traditional model, so to speak, or what I would call, which is they buy the hardware, they purchase the software on their own, and then they're working with various vendors to operate their ATM channel. This method is very doable. The vast majority do it in this model. But what we tend to find and hear from financial institutions is that operating in this manner is highly intensive, and it adds a layer of complexity. It also requires a lot of capital to run the ATM channel, and in this environment that we're in with high interest rates, maybe that's not the best use of capital for banks out there, right? In addition to that, it's because from a complexity perspective, it requires specialized skills, specialized knowledge from the bank themselves to be able to operate the ATM channel. And so what we've tried to do here is really simplify the complexity and reduce the intensity of management. And the way that we've done that is by creating an outsource model we call ATM as a service which really helps alleviate some of these challenges, which includes things like providing predictable total cost of ownership, where the price or the cost of operating the ATM doesn't change from year to year, and it is known for the duration of the agreement. It helps with reducing the number of vendors that a bank would have to work with to manage the ATM channel. Generally, on average, it takes something about 8 to 9 vendors to manage the ATM channels. And so as part of as a service, we're reducing that to maybe 3, 2, or in some cases, just 1 vendor as part of the solution. And then, of course, the other big one from my perspective, and I think from our partners' perspective as well, is it really helps banks stay current with the latest innovations, with the latest trends, customer experiences, customer expectations, and also from a mandate perspective, the PCI perspective, helps them continue to focus on providing the strategic direction of the ATM channel without focusing on the day-to-day burden of the operation. And so that's the intent of the solution itself. Now with that, before I turn it over to Julie, I did want to take just a moment to baseline what is as a service, because as you all know, this model has certainly picked up in popularity in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say. And so there's a lot of providers in the market that are offering as a service. But what as a service may mean for one provider may be different for other providers. And so I want to take a moment here to just define from an NCR Atleos perspective, here is how we view ATM as a service. So from our side, you can see here the graphics that I've shown, what I call the circle of services on the right. You'll notice that we start with the hardware. Generally, from an as-a-service perspective, we include the hardware, the actual ATM, into the ATM channel management. In addition to that, we're also including the software or the software application that runs on top of the hardware to deliver the services that your customers or the cardholders would use. Now, as part of the solution, we also include all the field services, so things like first-line maintenance, second-line maintenance, rigging, site survey, all IMAC events, all the various components as it relates to managing the ATM channel from a field perspective. And then as part of that, we're also including the back office IT operations. So things like dispatching, monitoring of the ATMs, incident management, software management, patch management. All of those components are included as part of the as-a-service model. Now, once you've done those, we do have the ability to continue to add additional components from a solution perspective. So things like cash management. There's various financial institutions out there that they want to continue to remove that burden of day-to-day management. So that entire ecosystem from a cash perspective can be included as part of as a service as well. In addition to that, we can continue to enhance it further by adding things like transaction management or transaction processing, where we essentially take the transactions and route them directly to the issuer processor via our proprietary network, and then gives us the ability to also route the foreign transactions or off-us transactions to various network schemes as part of this process. So again, just wanted to take a moment here to introduce NCR and also introduce as a service from our perspective, from the NCR Atleos perspective, so we can baseline the conversation here today as we discussed with Julie. So with that, Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you for introductions from your side and Seacoast Bank. Thanks again.
Thank you, Shvend, and thank you everyone who's on the webinar today with us. Excited to be talking about the partnership that Seacoast Bank has with NCR Atleos. Just to give you a little bit of an overview of who Seacoast is. Seacoast is a publicly traded, Florida-based, 90-year-old franchise. We're just shy of $15 billion in total assets, operating 77 locations, primarily across the state of Florida. We are a nationally chartered institution serving over 275,000 customers today, and really have put our flag in the state of Florida for the past 98 years, and are proud community banking partners across the footprint. And we are very much looking forward to talking about all the things that we've benefited from through ATM as a service through NCR Atleos. And I'll turn it back over to you, Shvend.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate that. Now, before we get going here, I failed to mention as I began, but let me say this now. As part of our discussion here today, towards the end, we have separated some time for Q&A. To the audience, to the members that are on here, if you want to ask a question, please do so. That will pop up based on our conversation here, I may introduce that question as part of the conversation that we have with Julie, or we may wait until the end where we can start asking some of those questions that maybe I don't get to. So that's the intent here. So again, Julie, thank you so much for being here with me today. Very much appreciate it. So I'll get going here and maybe just have a dialogue and maybe start with a question here that I have from my side. Obviously, you've been, as you said, an NCR Atleos as a service customer here now. I think you started around end of 2021 or so. And so as you went through this process, I'm curious for myself and also for the audience, as Seacoast was evaluating this program, why would you say that you've moved to an outsourced model versus what you were doing previously? If you could help us with that.
Sure. So we had several pain points that we were seeking to overcome when you think about outsourcing a solution such as ATM. One, we were finding that really it was taking 4 and 5 different departments within the bank to try and operate a singular channel. And as we move through that process, we learned that the level of expertise necessary to effectively drive the channel was lacking within the organization. We were struggling with visibility as to how the fleet was operating. We were struggling to really understand how to plan and prioritize capital expenditure needs and compete them with other important initiatives that the bank wanted to initiate at the time. And really, we were hearing that from a customer's perspective, we weren't meeting the level of expectations around uptime and feature functionality within the channel. And we wanted to think about how we might address those things kind of efficiently and to drive the scale. The other aspect I would say is that Seacoast has been a real serial acquirer of financial institutions over the past 9 to 10 years, picking up 16 different banks over that period of time. And as we were moving through our M&A playbooks, we were finding that ATM channel was always a challenge when we were also managing the various complexities of driving successful M&A activity across the state.
That makes sense. And so it sounds like CapEx also plays a role that as well from an M&A perspective. As you're thinking about acquiring maybe a new financial institution or branches, you also have to start thinking about, okay, how much we have to invest from an ATM channel perspective to be able to bring them up to speed to your standards from a Seacoast Bank perspective. And just so kind of going back to what you said, to me it also sounds like as you were going through this process, one, from a management perspective, it seemed that the actual management internally within your organization was maybe siloed. Maybe that's the word I would use. And so as a service, maybe help bring some of those things together. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would absolutely agree. And when you put a finer point on that siloing, when you think of ATMs from a hardware perspective, you think of them as a piece of technology that needs to be operated. And so when you had the technologists put their head around ATMs, it was all about, is it working? Is it pushing out cash effectively? Then you think about the operational units and the management and the flow of cash. And then you think about the marketing units who care about customer experience and customer convenience definitions. And then you think about the branches who were getting the inbound calls around the fact that maybe my ATM isn't working, or I'm frustrated because it's saying it's out of service for various reasons. And then you think about our accounting function, thinking about how they're balancing cash and managing GLs and trying to aggregate those different departments collaboratively, and prioritizing the time around ATMs was a big challenge for the bank as we were going through really what was a pretty substantial growth spurt. And when you think about that in the terms of our M&A landscape, the important things that you're focusing on to drive successful M&A is really about customer mapping activities and cultural continuity. It isn't about ATMs and where they're positioned and are they going to fit in the wall. And so really having a partner to help us think more cohesively to streamline that process and drive operational efficiencies, both through M&A as well as normal operations, became really critically important for us.
Makes perfect sense. And thank you for that, Julie. And so as maybe kind of walking through this process with you, as you heard and you spoke with, with NCR at the time and other partners, I assume, as part of this process and evaluation, right? I'm assuming there was a process on your end as far as, how to evaluate as a service prior to making a decision whether you should go with that model with one provider versus another, right? But purely from a model perspective, right? Can you maybe walk us through that a little bit as far as, what steps did you take to evaluate whether you should stay in the, status quo or go to as a service?
Yeah, I think certainly it starts with an evaluation of the partner landscape. And for Seacoast, we already had a relationship with NCR, but not as a service partner, mostly from a hardware partnership perspective. And so it was a natural look for us to evaluate NCR as being a global expert in all things ATM. So certainly the partner due diligence was part of that. But I think the other thing that was critically important was really evaluating the company's capability of managing something net new and what could be perceived as disruptive potentially to customers and to the organization. And could we absorb that level of change? And quite honestly, my experience with ATMs and being in the business for almost 30 years is that ATMs are considered a quote unquote loss leader when it comes to revenue historically for banks. And so very difficult for banks to prioritize, particularly Seacoast, a capital expenditure there and properly plan that strategy over a 3 to 5 year continuum from a capital stack perspective. Additionally, became really important for us to evaluate the customer expectations continuing to accelerate around the capability of the machine, the safety of the machine, the placement and the availability of ATMs, particularly as you think about it in terms of when we entered our partnership in 2021, which was immediately following the pandemic. And we learned very quickly, as I'm sure all of you on the phone would know, the importance of convenient alternative channels being stable and highly functioning for customers. And ATM became a big part of that conversation.
Which makes perfect sense. So it sounds like you went through a process of evaluation, both from a TCO perspective, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. And then also from capabilities perspective, as far as does it meet your needs today, but also will it meet your needs maybe tomorrow, especially in this environment that we are, where the customer's experience expectation is changing rapidly, right? And then from a staff management perspective, how you would go about it, and then if there would cause any disruptions from your side. And so as we think about that, I'm curious, since you have implemented as a service, what have you experienced from your side based on these things that you mentioned already? I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I think probably the one that is incredibly valuable from a customer experience perspective is Seacoast partners with J.D. Powers from understanding customer satisfaction scoring and net promoter scores. And what we were finding from the J.D. Powers work was that ATM as a channel was a real pain point for customers. They did not like their experience across our fleet. And so the first thing that we had, which was a really positive surprise, was an increase in customer satisfaction scores, tangibly data-driven. Secondly, from a business continuity perspective, being that we're a Florida-based franchise, we're very used to the volatility and the weather here in Florida. It's beautiful until it's hurricane season, right? And so when you think about what happens in the event of a catastrophic event such as a hurricane or a major tropical depression, and we've had multiple events that covered the state with category 4 and 5 storms, not having to worry about the ATM fleet has been such a relief for us. And if I gave you a more pointed example. During the last storm event, we had a branch, and this branch was the only branch anywhere for any financial institution in a very small community in the panhandle of Florida. And access to cash became incredibly important because it's a very cash intensive part of the state, based on the clam farming communities that we serve. And we had an ATM that flooded, and the branch flooded 4.5 feet of water. And because of our partnership, NCR Atleos was able to provide a brand new ATM to service that island when it didn't have any other way of getting access to cash in a matter of days. If Seacoast had to try and pull that off, it would have probably been a matter of a month or more. And so that was a huge win. The other thing I would say is just the predictability of the cost to expand the ATM network or to update the network became, it was a real moving target for us. And with our partnership, it's a fixed cost basis. We know exactly if we're going to build a branch, add a branch, take away a branch, buy banks, adding 4, 5, 6 ATMs at one time, what that cost basis is going to be. So very easy for us to budget and plan in advance. And then really from a fraud prevention perspective, a significant improvement. So when you think about just the rampant fraud the industry continues to experience, having state-of-the-art machines that are constantly being updated and upgraded with the newest, latest software technology to prevent vandalism and intrusion to customers' accounts and things of that nature was very important to us. And having that partnership with NCR Atleos took that sort of stress off the bank and put it onto NCR, and allowed us to sleep better at night knowing our customers were going to have a great experience that was safe and secure for them, with fantastic uptimes. Our uptimes on the fleet alone have been just substantially higher than what was happening when we were operating the fleet, because we were having machines of various different age and type and patching and upgrading that needed to be done that we were, quote, getting around to, and we weren't able to prioritize. And that's just a non-issue based on the partnership.
There's a lot to unpack there, Julie. Thank you. So I want to get to the business continuity here in a moment, because I think that's critical, especially if I think about all the various partners and financial institutions that we work with, and that tends to be one of the challenges that they face from their side. But before I get there, there's several things you said that really resonated with me, right? The TCO being one, the total cost of ownership, and that not changing from month to month or year to year, whatever that may be during the duration of your agreement. And then also not for you to not having to use your own CapEx as an example as you think about the M&A. But as part of this process, if you will, right, and also the various scores you said you can quantify easily to say that here's how we've improved or we've done better. I guess from a perspective of maybe customer retention or customer growth, I'm curious to see or to hear from you as far as how has as a service impacted that, if at all, right?
Yeah, I would say it has definitely impacted it. It's impacted it for the better. And the reason for that is when you think about how a customer defines convenience today, right? They define it by way of having access to multiple channels at the same time. And the ATM channel, quite honestly, as we were operating the fleet, was not a positive reflection of the brand of Seacoast because of the condition of the machines. And so customers, I think, were challenged with whether or not they felt like they should continue to bank with us if they didn't have A, the right access, and B, the machine that they were interacting with was actually going to work well. So because we've been able to provide them with, frankly, new, shiny, high-tech ATM machines, and we've also been able to expand the fleet because of our total kind of cost being very predictable, we have seen an increase in customers as well as a deepening opportunity within those customers, because the machines are consistently able to drive also just-in-time marketing information to our clients in a really positive way, so that as they interact with the machines, they are also getting a chance to hear other ways they can benefit from banking with Seacoast. I think the other thing I would say about the customer retention and growth is Seacoast recently expanded our operations into South Florida. And for those of you who may or may not be familiar with South Florida, it's a very diverse part of the state of Florida and a very diverse part of the United States. And as we entered Miami specifically, we understood the need to have machines that had an ease of being able to operate in a bilingual environment, where with a click of a button, a customer could choose the language of choice. And in Miami's case, that's very much weighted to Spanish. And so that was another way for us to be able to effectuate customer retention and growth, because we didn't have to worry about the programmatic concerns related to that, because NCR did that for us.
That's awesome. So I always have this saying when I meet with our partners and customers, which is don't just outsource, but outsource with a purpose. It sounds like you guys did just that, which is you took what you were doing, you made it better, right? And then you improved the functionality and the experience at the ATM for the customers. I'm going to go to a question that we have in the Q&A box. I think it kind of relates to our discussion here, Julie. And I can certainly answer it, but I'd like for you to actually provide a perspective as we go through this. So one of the participants on the call said, how are new ATMs considered? Is this I want to have an ATM here conversation with NCR Atleos, or is it more collaborative effort where NCR is determining additional next steps as it relates to when you want to add a new ATM?
Yeah, I would love to answer that. So what we've experienced with NCR Atleos is we've experienced a strategic partnership. And what I mean by that, specific to the question, is instead of me saying to the team at within the bank or within NCR Atleos, I want to put an ATM and associate it with a new branch I'm going to stand up in a specific marketplace, I actually collaborate with NCR Atleos and talk to them about what Seacoast's growth initiatives are in a specific marketplace and how we could use ATMs to expand our brand or our brand presence within a market that may or may not include a branch. And so before, in order to put a brand presence in a market, we would potentially buy an institution with branches or de novo a branch, which is something we're beginning to do a little bit of now. And we would do that sort of as a branch plus ATM because that's what you're supposed to do. Now the conversation is we'd like to expand our presence in, say, Brevard County or Broward County or Orange County, pick a county in Florida. What should our concentration look like, which is a combination strategy between ATM branches and potentially, LPOs or other type of flags you can put in the ground. And we also have been talking more strategically with NCR Atleos about what other institutions are doing across the U.S. in a best practice environment on things like feature functionality on the ATMs, such as denominations or ITM technology and things of that nature. So it's a strategic partnership. I would say before we created ATM as a service as part of our partnership with NCR, it would be a phone call. Hey, I want to buy an ATM. I want it in Waller. I want it freestanding, or I want it drive up. Now we actually have you all come into the conversation about, I've got you in the conversation right now on a branch I'm looking to open. Should we put in an ATM? What kind should we put in? Where should it be located? So even site selection and site preparation has become more of a strategic partnership and conversation versus a one-way experience. And it actually has made our ATM strategy stronger and better because NCR brings more expertise to that thought process than we were able to bring previously, because we only think about it historically as bankers, right? And NCR Atleos thinks of it as an experience channel, as a, if you will, kind of through the point of sale lens, because of the retail experience that the company has well beyond the financial institution space.
So to maybe reiterate to a degree, Julie, what you're saying is that the relationship with what you used to have with NCR Atleos was more transactional in nature, where now has moved to a partnership, a true partnership, where we're also providing feedback, thought leadership, and just providing knowledge of what we have in various areas on what you're trying to accomplish from a strategic direction, and helping you hopefully make the best decision available possible for your organization.
100%, absolutely. And the frequency in which we do that is very intentional on both companies' parts. It's not a kind of a one and done. We have an ongoing touch-based cadence that allows us to continue to talk about strategic thought leadership and proactively think about what our forward strategy should be.
That's great. So I want to go back to kind of something that you said earlier that I mentioned, which was around the business continuity process. Based on what you said, you've seen an improvement on that side, either operationally or from a planning perspective. I'd love to, if you have any additional specific details that you can provide around that process, I think that would be beneficial to the various participants that we have on the phone. Because as I said earlier, that's one of the challenges that we hear from bank to bank, right? It's a common theme that we have, which is there's something that we could do and probably do it better, but we're not exactly sure how. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as far as how as a service to maybe help in that process.
Sure. So I think first off, when you think about business continuity planning, reporting, visibility, real time, being able to see what is happening in the environment, whether it's through your ATM channel or through your facilities, through your digital channels in which customers interact, becomes critically important. And when you're in the middle of the literal storm, right, a disaster of any kind, it's very hard to see the forest for the trees, right? And so of all the things you're managing to, you're worried about, and particularly as it relates to storms, you're worried about the safety and soundness of your associates and their families, of your customers, right? And kind of the sort of last thing on your mind is, are the ATMs full of cash? Are they working? Are they up? Are they down? Are they getting electricity? Is there been a water intrusion? All of those things, and trying to garner all that reporting and visibility was poor at best for Seacoast and nearly impossible to do fast enough. The great thing about in ATM as a service is those reports are almost instant from NCR, and so it gave us the ability on multiple BCP and disaster recovery type calls as a committee to be able to provide that visibility quickly, and allowed us to make very smooth business decisions in the moment without us having to have interruption from a service perspective. The second piece of that was really about, it's really the 1-2 punch we got through the partnership, which wasn't just about ATMs as a service, but it was also about going away from the previous ATM network of ATMs that we were using to provide free non-charges on foreign ATMs. And so joining the Allpoint network became an incredible booster for Seacoast, because it gave our customers access to tens of thousands of ATMs in prime retailers that are all present within the state of Florida. And we have a lot of customers that are outside the state of Florida, with a lot of customers up in the northeastern part of the U.S. that are quote unquote snowbirds to us in the Florida market, and allowing them to be able to not have to close their account while they go home to their northern, respite for 6 months, and then come back to Florida and reopen the account because we had access through the Allpoint network. And we were nervous, I'm going to be honest, about making a network change of that magnitude, because we had a partnership with the Presto network with Publix, which is a big giant supermarket chain here in Florida. And we were worried how customers would respond to that. And they were thrilled to have, 3 to 4 times the number of ATMs at no charge available to them, especially as they were exiting the state of Florida in the middle of a storm. Everybody wants to get out of here when a hurricane is coming, so to speak. And so we had the ability to point them to multiple ATMs in their path out of the storm through the Allpoint network. And then, overall, as I mentioned previously, just the ability to get replacement ATMs in critical markets when there were catastrophic damage events happening was second to none. I had no understanding of how quickly that could be mobilized, and it allowed us to retain customers in markets that probably would have departed from us if we weren't not able to serve them in a crisis where they absolutely needed access to cash. So really all those things pulled together created a real big win from a BCP perspective. And I don't think we really thought about that as a part of our business decision for ATM as a service. It was just an added bonus that we had come as a windfall that we weren't expecting.
That's great. So it sounds like not only did you think about it from your own channel perspective, how you run the ATMs, either at your branches or off-premise locations that you may be running and operating, but also from a total retail distribution strategy as far as how you provide additional access to your customer base, the snowbirds, as you said, right, with additional access through the Allpoint network. That's fantastic. So as we discussed here, the as a service solution, I'm curious to hear your thoughts as it relates to, there's obviously banks on the phone with us here today, and some of them, I'm assuming, are considering as a service as part of their strategy. What advice, since you've gone through this process now, what advice would you have for these banks if they're considering this strategy from just a strategy perspective at a high level?
Well, hopefully this is not too tongue-in-cheek, but just don't be afraid to do it. I think Seacoast, if we look back on our business decision, we were quite honestly very nervous about making a decision to let go of the control of a critical channel that touches our customers. And as bankers, I think we all resonate with the fact that if it's touching our customers, we want to be able to, quote, fix it or manage it. And in this case, we were trying to do that and doing it poorly. And I'm so glad we took the leap of faith to just move forward with it. I think the second thing I would tell everyone is that it turned the ATM channel into a customer experience marketing channel for us in ways that we can be proud of. And so as you're kind of ideating on, should I do it? Should I not do it? I can tell you from experience, it was a great decision because the customer experience and satisfaction scores are resoundingly better. I think the third thing is you've got to have 2 groups of people, really 3 involved upfront early. 1, you have to have IT and technology in the conversation, because if you have them in on the front side, they won't get concerned or feel threatened that whatever is happening with a third party coming into this particular technology channel as they see it could cause problems. I think having them in the conversation and allowing them to speak to the technology side of the business with the technologists at NCR Atleos was super impactful and powerful. Number 2, I would encourage you to always have your accounting team in the conversation, because once they understand the predictability of the ability to budget and manage the financials within running ATM as a service, they will become an advocate as opposed to a foe in the process. I think the thing that I like the most about NCR is when they bring the team to the table, they bring specific spokes of expertise: the accounting, the reporting, the technology, the actual deposit operations, transactional side, and then ultimately a very outstanding marketing background to the table. And so anytime you're dealing with a customer experience channel, you want your marketing team in the front of the conversation. But when you think about ATMs and ATMs as a service, you really need to have those teams up front in the conversation so that when you go through the process of the partnership dialogue, you have all the players bought in before you flip the switch, if you will. I will also say the thought of at the time we entered the partnership, I think we replaced over 80 machines in the fleet. And that feels very daunting. I would tell you that was very seamless. And we were able to partner strategically with NCR Atleos about how we went about that to minimize customer disruption and uptime within the fleet through transition. And that worked extremely well, but it required a lot of communication cross-functionally between the two companies. And we happened to do it while we were also doing a significant M&A transaction. We were doing it at the same time. And that level of complexity I was very concerned about. But the thoughtfulness of NCR in the process to lean in and listen was very good.
That's amazing, Julie. I want to touch base on something you said here a moment ago, that you certainly, as you go through this process, either through sort of the evaluation process and probably the onboarding component as well, that you need to identify key resources within the organization to help through that process. So that makes complete sense. I think one of the challenges that as an industry that we face, and it kind of goes back to what you said earlier, is that you have silos sometimes from department to department, is that as you go through the onboarding, you may not know sort of, who should I engage, as an example? Should I engage IT? Should I engage an ops person? Should I engage accounting or various other folks, right? Hindsight is always 20/20, but in that process, I'd love to hear from you, what did NCR Atleos do from a guidance perspective to say, here is from our knowledge, here is the way that we believe that you should manage it from your perspective, if you could touch on that.
Sure. When we first thought about it, we were thinking, well, I guess maybe we need one or two people in. And what our conversation around best practices was with NCR Atleos was think broader, not narrower. When you think about a collaborative team, and I'm kind of a big believer in one team, right? And so when you think about ATM as a service, there's multifacets to it, and it touches both internal customers and external customers. So having the expertise of one of the world's leading industry experts on ATMs lead the conversation versus me telling NCR Atleos what I think I need became really evident quickly to me, which was, I know a lot about a lot, but I don't know a lot about running a very successful hundreds of thousands of ATMs across a very large footprint globally, and you all do. And so for me to really be curious and ask a lot of questions, but be willing to listen and lean in on the best practices. I mean, one of those best practices was we thought we had the best partners from a facilities, marketing, surround, wrap perspective, if you will. And NCR Atleos was a very critical partner in saying, have you thought about, did you think about how that machine sits and is positioned, and what does the covering over that machine look like? Your marketing design is beautiful, but is it easy to execute in multiple different types of locations, through a drive-through, through an in-wall, through a walk-up, through a kiosk? And those were strategic conversations that we thought we knew about, and we really didn't. And so I would just encourage everybody on the phone, if you're considering it, remember who the expert is on ATMs and software on ATMs. It is not all of us as bankers. We think we know, but we really need to lean in on experts. And in this case, that would be NCR Atleos as a third party. And I would just also say, as a third party partner, having one that has spent over 100 years serving financial institutions, you all get what is important to banks, which is customers. At the end of the day, we're in the customer business. And so I think that that is really important to think about when you're thinking about a partner for any as a service perspective, it needs to be a partner that's an expert in that field. And in this case, NCR Atleos has proven to be that over decades of time.
So I'm curious, now that you have this experience and knowledge, Julie, and you've gone through the evaluation process, through the onboarding process, and now life cycle, right, where we're managing it day to day, if you had to do it again, right, would you still choose as a service as your path forward?
I would definitely choose it again, and I would choose it sooner. Honestly, we waited too long. I can't believe we lived with the headache of it for as long as we did. And so to say that we would do it again is an easy yes for me. And honestly, for all the departments that were trying to service the ATM channel and struggling to do so.
That's great. And so as part of maybe now that you think back, right, on all the things that have happened, is there anything that you would maybe consider changing from a perspective of how you approach it and then how we execute from an as a service model perspective?
As it relates to changing anything, I think the only change I would have made was to do it faster. I think we took a long time to let it go, so to speak, let it go of the control and get comfortable. And I think that created more customer dissatisfaction at a time when it was critically important for us to focus on that. I think the thing that I would do probably a little differently is as we move forward through the process, I would have engaged more partners in the experience up front. I can tell you all the partners to engage now. I probably would have engaged more. I definitely would tell you, do not neglect having someone that is an expert in your retail franchise or your consumer franchise or even your small business franchise at the table for the conversation, because those are the people that understand best customer experiences because they're getting it live and in action every day. And so making sure that you don't just have this driven from the back to the front, it really needs a collaborative front and back viewpoint internally within the financial institution, in my opinion. And then I would say, as you roll it out, make sure that as you stand up your partnership, you stand it up with lots of flexibility so that you have the opportunity strategically to do future things within your network and within your framework of fleet that is now owned by NCR to stay ahead of the customer experience and expectation curve on a go-forward basis.
That's right. And actually, that kind of goes into my next question immediately, which is, as you think about it as a service, now you're part of the life cycle management, right? You're meeting your customer needs. And you talked about the customer experience being something that's critical to your organization earlier. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts as it relates to your role within the outsourced model from an ATM perspective as it relates to evolving or going forward, right? So from your perspective, in the next 5 years, next 10 years, I know that seems like a very long time from now, right? But how do you think you're going to continue to interact with your partner, in this case, NCR Atleos, right, from an as-a-service perspective? Are you planning on just staying as is, or are there future things that you're wanting to accomplish as part of this process as well?
Well, we certainly know as bankers, if we stay as is or sit still, the world around us will take over our space, right? And so, no, we don't plan on sitting still. I think the thing about what we did initially in the partnership was making sure that those ATMs out of the gate were smart, intelligent ATMs' ability to take and receive deposits, right? And so the machines today are equipped to do that. We also worked with NCR to make sure the machines, when appropriate, could have the ability for customers to select different denominations. And there is definitely plans based on our customer engagement surveys around where we could experiment with denominations of smaller bills, for example, in certain marketplaces and or larger bills in other marketplaces, depending on what our customers are telling us. And then certainly the largest part of the strategy is when and how we deploy intelligent teller machine technology or ITM technology. And really, it's not just the partnership with NCR, but it's the network within NCR group of banks and financial institutions and large-scale retailers that NCR Atleos works with across a global framework that is allowing us access to best practices of others so that when we deploy ITM technology across various ATMs in our fleet with NCR, that we're doing it correctly, we're doing it with the right frame of reference, and partnering with the C-suite of other banks across the country of what they've tried that didn't work, so that we can avoid those potholes, if you will, is a big part of that. But I would say multiple denominations and ITM are definitely part of the future partnership with ATM as a service with NCR Atleos for Seacoast.
I'm glad that you touched on that, Julie, because we had one of the questions actually during the Q&A from one of the participants that was asking specifically about the ATMs. And so basically what you're saying is that you're operating an ATM-only fleet at the moment, but that's definitely something that you're considering as part of the go-forward strategy from a Seacoast perspective.
Yes, especially as you think about it in large metro markets, right? So in Florida, we have a lot of 4 or 5 major MSAs, all of which we are present in. But if you think about some of the MSAs in Florida and the size and magnitude, right, they're bigger than, certain states in the U.S. And so when you think about that, ITM technology allows us the ability to expand what feels like a bigger Seacoast in a big metro market, right? And having a human interaction through that technology without having the expense of the ground up or lease up or acquisition cost of a branch franchise in a metro market. And so ITMs are definitely part of our glide path. It's just about when and what markets are absorbing that technology well and which ones are not. And NCR Atleos is a partner telling us it's working here, but it might not work here. I would highly recommend you stay out of this particular market, for example. That's part of our partnership as we move forward and think about expanding into ITMs.
That's great. With that, Julie, I think that's all I have for my prepared remarks for today. Again, I want to say thank you so much for being with us here today, and I appreciate the partnership. As I said earlier, we do have a Q&A section. I know that we have a few minutes here. There's been some questions that I've already seen and asked as part of this process, but I will turn it over now to Craig. And then, Craig, if you want to take it from here and provide any other input that we have.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ben. I appreciate it. Many thanks once more to Julie and yourself for a very informative and enjoyable exchange focused on ATM as a service. It was great information for everyone today, I think. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. Please be on the lookout for a recording of today's session. And should you have any questions at all or need assistance, please do let us know. More than happy to help. So thanks once more to all in attendance today and to our great presenters. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.